For it. All right, we are live. Cool. All right, one moment, and I will quickly send this out. Cool. All right. So, hello, everybody. How's it going? Long time no see. It's been a while. With me today is Jeff Webb, my co-publisher at Human Events. And the former CEO and founder of Varsity Brands. So, for those of you who don't know, Varsity Brands is one of the biggest companies in the entire cheerleading industry. I think you transformed a company that started running cheerleading camps, is my understanding, and turned it into the biggest cheerleading apparel company in the country. And I feel remarkably lucky to have somebody like Jeff as a partner in all this. And I kind of just wanted to we've been talking about doing a podcast for a while, and I expect this will be a recurring thing. But in this first one, I really wanted to, among other things, just get a handle on how exactly Jeff built the business that he built. So how about we start there? So, I guess, Jeff, give yourself a little background on yourself and how, sort of the history of you in Varsity and then we'll get to the politics stuff later, but I just kind of want to start with business biography.
Sure. Absolutely. Hey, and by the way, I feel very fortunate to be partnered up with you. I think it's going to be a great adventure, and look forward to doing some amazing things. So as far as the company itself is concerned, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, very much middle-class family. It's great parents, great brother and sister, and went to the University of Oklahoma. And I was on the cheerleading team there, and then was going to go to law school, but decided to kind of take the cheerleading concept and really hobby that I had and try to really transform the activity was my concept, and bring athleticism and entertainment to it to really kind of modernize it. Mm-hmm. And so I might be able to make a company out of this, and I raised a little money from friends and family. It wasn't very much. And set up the first world headquarters of Varsity in Memphis, Tennessee, which is where I'd had had some customer contacts. By the way, that was the second bedroom of my apartment, the world headquarters.
That's fair enough. That's where Human Events has been headquartered in my house for some time now. So
it works pretty well sometimes.
It does.
If you have a small staff, let me say that. And then you know what I did? I developed a curriculum about how to teach high schools and colleges to integrate these new stunts and acrobatics and so on into what they normally did. And then I hired top college cheerleaders, 25 of them, and trained them in how to actually administer the camps and execute on the curriculum. And we set up these summer training camps throughout the southern United States, and advertised what we were going to do, and spent all of the money before the first registration came in. My whole life passed in front of me for the first time. More on that later. And so it worked. We were actually able to get enough students, about 4,000 that first summer, and made a profit the first year. I think it was $1.50 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then we just kept expanding the camps over the years. This is the late 70s. We added a uniform component a few years later. And we were the first ones to bring kind of athletic footwear and performance fabric. And then we got into kind of the third leg of the stool, if you will, by kind of coming up with what is the modern day cheerleading competition, like people see on ESPN. That wasn't around. We actually developed that concept so that we could get our style of cheerleading on television. Hooked up with ESPN in the early days. ESPN was in about 5 million homes. That's it. When we hooked up with them, they had no NFL, no college basketball, none of the big sports. And Varsity is ESPN's longest standing broadcast partner.
That's fascinating.
And from those, we took the educational part of the camps, the uniforms, the competitions, and it really just kind of built the franchise over the next 25 years. So that's how we created Varsity. We went public, we've gone private, we've been with private equity. The company eventually merged with a graduation products company, Herff Jones, and then acquired BSN Sports to be Varsity Brands. And that's kind of the rest is kind of history. I left there after a long career, full-time, at the end of December, and was starting already to, as you know, to get into the political world to some extent. And I'm still involved with cheerleading to some extent with the International Cheer Union, which is our international federation that's working on getting cheerleading in the Olympics. So that's probably more information than you or your audience wanted, but there.
I want to dig deep, and we're planning on doing an hour of these a week, and I mean, so there are a couple decisions I want to kind of get into, just because I'm literally just curious. Like, it's not even politics; I'm just curious. So the decision to go from running these camps, right? I get that. Like, if you've run a camp, you've built a curriculum, you're essentially setting up a training program. But the distance from that to, like, also let's set up a clothing company to sell to the kids at the camp. That's an interesting decision. And I mean, so I guess, like, what went into, like, did you just see the opportunity because the clothing everybody was wearing was cruddy and you're like, I can just build a business, and how did you link them too? Because it doesn't strike me as intuitive of, like, okay, maybe do you give the apparel away at the camps? I mean, I don't know. I'm just curious. So how did that?
Yeah. Well, people ask me now, like, well, if this company you started with camps and you built this big company, a couple of $1 billion eventually, and it must be great to see your original vision come to fruition, right? Well, that's a bunch of bull. I don't dispute that. I just say thank you very much. But the fact of the matter is, if you take most like long-term entrepreneurs, what you find is that they don't usually have kind of the total end in clarity. They start out with a concept, they work at it, they build it, and then they're open. their antenna is up for new concepts, spin-offs, product additions, and that's really what happened to me. After about 5 years, we'd actually begun to really, for our concept to work, to transform cheerleading, make it more athletic. And the problem was the apparel and the footwear that was out there with these traditional companies that had been in the cheerleading equipment business for a long time. They didn't have performance application. The fabrics didn't really work. They were boring. They didn't have a lot of color and stripe and reflect the new style. And the same thing on the footwear. So we really got into the uniform market, because our customers were asking us to. They couldn't find the type of products that complemented what we were bringing to them and what they could do. So we actually then said, okay, we're going to go out. We're going to, one of my instructors named Craig Tallman was from Ohio State, was a cheerleader there, and had become this clothing designer. He was living in New York. I hired him full time. He kind of revolutionized the look in cheerleading uniforms. We outsourced the actual manufacturing. We found an athletic apparel company in Tennessee to manufacture the uniforms. So we put out our catalog with our new concept and hoped. And once again, we got a good response. There is a little bit of I talked about my life passing in front of me that first summer. It's a recurring theme for me, by the way. But when we got all those uniform orders in, we'd put our reputation with our camp customers on the line. Come buy these uniforms for us. We're going to solve your problems. We sent all the uniforms to the manufacturer, and we got no response. The uniforms didn't get delivered. It went on and on and on. Finally, I got a phone call one Sunday evening from the guy that owned this factory saying, hey, we're bankrupt. We can't get your orders out. So people had already sent, all of our customers had sent their money in. Our reputation was on the line, and we were like, we're cooked here. So I was able, through a contact, to go out. A fellow that actually provided our T-shirts, our kind of merch that we used at our camps, and he was connected with the kind of the textile industry over in North Carolina and South Carolina. Was able to find a gentleman who was managing a sweater plant. And he always wanted to have his own company. We bought sewing machines, set him up in his basement in North Carolina, and got the uniforms out. So we barely that, and then we eventually built this plant, and then we got multiple contractors, and the rest is history. Today, Varsity does over 1 million uniforms a year. So the great majority of high schools and colleges in this country wear varsity uniforms. So that's how, it wasn't part of my vision. We kind of stumbled into it, but frankly, or thankfully, we were able to make it work.
I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? You're teaching people this like athletic cheerleading, and then they're like, but we can't do it with the clothes we have, and there's nothing on the market. Well,
Right.
okay. So it's like, you're like, oh, okay. Well, I guess we could make clothes.
Well, if we want to keep having this concept, we got to come up with a way for them to have the right apparel to do it in, right?
Right. And I guess that's sort of that's sort of similar, I would guess, also for the sort of the organized competition component of it too. Right.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, maybe you want to describe how that, because again, I'm interested in like, how did you either, stumble into that idea, or did that just, develop on your own? That's another interesting, because it's like you invented a sport is what it sounds like to me, basically.
Well, thank you. Mm-hmm. Well, so here's how the competition came into being. Mm-hmm. This was, again, a year or two after the uniform. So we're about 6 or 7 years into the company, early 80s. And, I said that when I started the company, I raised a little money from family and friends. It was a total of $85,000, right? And I thought, that's more money we'll ever need. Well, that was wrong. We went through all the money I told you at first. Well, what was happening is that while we were making a profit, a reasonable profit, because as we were growing, it was absorbing all the profit, all the extra cash. And we weren't able to expand as fast as we wanted to. We knew we had this great concept. We had this tremendous feedback about it. I mean, we had, one of my sayings has become, when the wind is at your back, you run. And unfortunately, we couldn't run because we didn't have the capital, because we kept, I hadn't raised enough. So we said, okay, so we can't expand nationally like we'd like to. We think there's an opportunity there. What can we do? And so by this time, I had 4 or 5 people working in my office, and that was our team. And we said, well, why don't we try to find a way for people to pay us to come to them? Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we got to show them what we can do. We got to show them this new concept and how exciting and athletic it is, and that we can make your team able to do this. And so we said, well, okay, well, why don't we try to get cheerleading on television? There was no internet then. And so why don't we try to get it on television? Okay, well, all we were doing were camps. You can't do a 4-day camp on television. So we said, well, why don't we take these new concepts, these new acrobatics and entertainment, and why don't we create a short routine where these teams can put all of those elements into a routine, and then we let them compete. Mm-hmm. And that sounded like a good idea. The problem is we didn't have anybody to produce it or any place to air it. And one of our first sponsors was Converse. I mean, Converse used to be one of the top athletic shoes a long time ago. The executive vice president for marketing of Converse was a gentleman named Joe Dean. Joe Dean was famous throughout the South. His other job on the weekends was doing the play-by-play for the Southeastern Conference basketball game of the week. And I tell people, Joe Dean was a tremendous man. I tell him he was Dick Vitale before Dick Vitale. He had this saying, this folksy saying, when somebody made a basket, he goes, string music. It became famous throughout the South. Well, so I went to Joe because I was working with him on the sponsorship for us, and I said, here's the concept. We want to get on television. You're on TV every week. Where do I go? So he was working, that broadcast was being done by a company called TVS. TVS was one of the largest sports syndicators in the country. In those days, if you were on television, it was one of 3 ways. You were on either one of 3 networks, there was no Fox, or you were local, or you syndicated, right? Mm-hmm. Where the show could be on at different times in different areas, or you kind of grouped together the various stations and had a broadcast. So TVS was doing these different basketball conferences. He introduced me he made an introduction to the president of TVS. I went to New York, my first time to New York City, and I sat down with this guy in this big New York office, and they were doing soccer all over the world and all these major sports. And I said, hey, I'm here to talk about cheerleading. And he's like, okay. He told me, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I took this meeting because Joe Dean asked me to do it, and but I have no idea. I mean, I can't even visualize what this would look like, right? So I had to explain it to him, and actually had some film and showed him how we could do this stuff. And he said, this is kind of interesting. He said, I need to see a little more. And I invited him down to one of our camps, and he saw what was being done. And he came to me and said, okay, let's do it. And we had a 3-year contract Joe Dean eventually moved on to be the athletic director at LSU, by the way. Great career. And so we produced our first show in Orlando, and it was done at SeaWorld, not at Disney, where most of the varsity shows are done now. But Disney didn't want to do a concept. They kind of threw me out of the office when I went there, and we were able to do the SeaWorld. We were able to get them to provide the venue, and the first cheerleading competition was on a stage at the water ski show at SeaWorld, surrounded by water. So the team comes out.
That's actually kind of scary.
Yeah,
liability issues. Liability issues galore.
Right. Yeah, you could. Yeah. I would not do it today. Let me put it like that. But
right.
But so the teams would be out there, and of course, if you stepped out of bounds, I mean, you're in the water, So it was.
They kept the whales somewhere else, I hope, right? Like
yes.
The sharks were.
We had the sharks circling, and made it get a real drama. Put a real edge on it when somebody got close to the side. but awesome. Yeah, so eventually, I mean, SeaWorld was great to work with. We eventually outgrew that. The competition, that was for high school teams, by the way, before college even. And the event continued, it just exploded. And we eventually moved to Disney because we outgrew SeaWorld. They decided later that they would do a concept since we had about 50,000 athletes participating in our events. And we added college, we added more events. When ESPN added ESPN2, Lauren Matthews, the VP of programming there, came to me and said, well, we've got this new 24-hour network. The one thing we don't have is enough programming. Can you take your events and add different divisions? What else can we do together? Which we did. So I tell people that, so back to why we started doing the competitions, it worked. We got great ratings, and people did start paying us to come to them, and we were able to expand nationally. So
interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of how we all put. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And I go back to my original concept about entrepreneurism and about kind of long-term master entrepreneurs. It's really being able to take a concept and build onto it and make it bigger and more valuable and impactful. And that's, I think that's what we were able to do with my team.
And it sounds like it's kind of like a different event than the apparel, and it's sort of a different process. Like the apparel sounds like that's just customer feedback coming back and being like, oh, we should probably just do this. And this was more like innovative problem solving of like, okay, how do we expand the brand? And, sort of, I guess, more like classic innovation in the sense, as opposed to one where you're like, oh, thanks for pointing out there's this massive market hole I guess we should fill.
That's right. Yeah. We had to, that's right. And we had to kind of create the market. The one thing too, when I speak to young people in particular about entrepreneurism, one thing that I think most entrepreneurs share is also a certain tolerance for risk, because on all of those occasions, starting the company, adding the uniforms, bringing in the competitions, we did not have, as I mentioned, a lot of extra cash or capital. And so you take a measured risk. You go, what can this do? How important is it? And how do we think we can actually execute on it? So thankfully along the way, and that's why I say measured, you try to never bet the ranch, right? But you want to take, when opportunity presents itself to have a major impact on the success of your organization, then you take it. And we did.
Got it. Okay. That's cool. All right. Well, I mean, I think my business questions are now satisfied, because I don't know. I'm sitting here. I'm like, this is just fascinating to me, because even though, like I've never, other than Human Events, I haven't run a business per se, but as a person who's, economics major in college, I'm always fascinated by this stuff. Anyway.
Well, thank you. Let's
pivot to politics. So Adam Townsend asked a question. He's a very good periscoper himself, but he asked a very good question that I was going to ask you anyway, which is, you're now effectively, your involvement in varsity is less now. You're sort of like, I don't know if you're now consulting or sort of.
I am consulting. Yep.
Right. But you're in a position where you don't need to be involved in politics if you don't want to. Like, as I was saying to you on the phone, if you wanted to just go to Tahiti and drink drinks with the umbrellas in the mall for the rest of your days, you could do that. So
sounds like a good 30-day experience to me. So
right. I think I don't know. I think it was like, I borrowed that from Naftali Bennett, who's like this Israeli politician. He ran a startup, and he's like, I could just retire, but I'm going to do politics. And so I'm curious, like, what decided to get you into the political game? Because you don't need to, and it's definitely a blood sport now. So kind of what brought you, and why did you decide to get more engaged in politics?
Well, I was a political science major in college, was always very interested in current events and public policy, and kept up with it and became, especially when cable became pervasive, I became a news junkie, like all of us, I guess. And so I was always interested in it. And actually had people, as I was growing the business and became more successful, I had people encourage me to run for office. But to be honest with you, I was too busy building and sustaining that, the company. And as I began to look at that, I got to a point where the company had been really built out. It was really doing well. We had great people, and decided this is a time for me to look at some of the other things that have interested me in life and explore them. And so I started a couple of years ago really looking at what I could do politically that would make a difference. One of the things I feel like I'm so fortunate in is that, the kind of company that Varsity is, where you're providing something that I think provides a lot of value to young people when they participate. It provides value to the school with school spirit, which is really just kind of camaraderie. That's really what it is, and to the local communities. And then also it was fun. And we were doing something that I felt like was really worthwhile with great people. We were able to attract people to that vision that was so incredible to work with them and to have them, as they say, kind of hook their star to what I'm doing and build something great. So I wanted to make sure that as I was exploring these different things, it's something that I felt like was important. And then that's number one. And number two, where I could make a difference. And I knew it was important. But I had to kind of find, what kind of the niche, the thing that I felt like really worked for me and where I could hopefully provide the most value, which is real important to me. And to be honest, I had this. This is going to sound a little bit hokey here, but I had this experience. It was almost like this epiphany experience at one of our events. One of our big competitions, and I was at Disney. There was like 1,000 teams. It goes on for 3 days, or young people from all over the country, and they're competing and they're practicing, and all their friends and their family are there. And I took a break one evening. We were getting ready to wrap things up, and it was just kind of dusk, and it was at the sports complex at Disney. And I walked outside and looked at everything that was going on, 3 different venues, 2 different television shows, people everywhere. And I just had this unbelievable feeling. And it's like people say, yeah, I know what that was. That was like, look what I did. But it really wasn't. It was, wow, how lucky am I to be at this position, to have built this organization that I think has done great things for hundreds, maybe millions of young people, to have an incredible staff of people that are dedicated to what we're doing. I mean, it's living the dream, right? And
that's pretty cool.
I was honestly, and I'm telling you, it just choked me up. And it was something totally uncontrollable. I understand where the word comes from now. I really never would have epiphany. But so I began to I look around and said, well, where can I make a difference, and what's really important to me? And as I looked at my professional journey and the fact that I had all these young people through the years that came in as college cheerleaders, went to work for the company, became sales reps or marketing representatives. And really, it's a company built with cheerleaders. Most of them came from the middle class like me. And being the principal in a large business, I understood what some of the challenges that people trying to start a business, what those challenges are today. It's a lot harder than when I was starting a company a long time ago. And where I kind of decided to go with this was like, okay, I owe this to these young people. I owe this to this next generation. I've been lucky. They've helped me. What can I do to use my experience? How to build building an organizational culture, successful one. How can I use that to help them? So that's where I said, okay, this is my niche in politics. Somehow, some way, I'm going to try to do something that helps the cause of the middle class. And then along the way, I met Charlie Kirk through a mutual friend, and we talked about, and he said, after a couple of meetings, he said to me, he's like, yours is a voice that needs to be heard. and let's see what we can do to make that happen. And so we formed, Middle Class Warriors, and we eventually, I was lucky enough to be introduced to you through Charlie, and have such great respect and admiration for what you've done and what you're doing. And here we are.
Yeah, here we are indeed. Yeah. I mean, people who aren't aware, like Jeff is my partner, right? We did a deal, I think last September, and he's come on as co-publisher at Human Events. He and his team have built out a news division. I mean, you can actually check out the website now. It's remarkably different. One of the cool things about StreamYard, it's pretty easy for me to show this to everybody. But let's see here. Give me a second. Share screen. And that's not that. Okay. Application window. Give me one moment. Boom. Here we go. Okay. So you can see here, I mean, we've got, there's a brand new web redesign that we've got, and there's, we have news. I mean, the opinions and Ian's art is still here, but like we've got a brand new Human Events with our team on the left and a bunch of new articles. So if you guys want to check it out, I mean, this is the new site. And I mean, it's a lot of it's due to, really most of it is due to like all the new redesign in the news is due to Jeff and his team putting that together. So I'm extraordinarily grateful to be partnering with Jeff, somebody as experienced as him in entrepreneurship, right? I started this business by just having the opportunity to buy the brand for Human Events and then try and get things going. But before that, I was just a lawyer. I made the mistake of going to law school that you managed to avoid.
It's an exciting time and exciting opportunity, and it's great to be partnered up with you.
Absolutely. So I guess there's a sort of veering off into the question you got into a little bit before, but I think that the next obvious one is getting into your political views. I guess like why populism? A lot of CEOs and a lot of corporate types are very kind of old school Republican, and I would classify you very much as a new school Republican, right? Like more interested in America, and kind of the nationalist politics, pro worker, and not obsessed with corporate tax rates, for example.
That's exactly right.
So I'm curious, like what led you to that, and have you always been that way? And did you always fit as a Republican? That would be another interesting question, given
Great question. My parents were both Republicans, and I guess I always was a Republican. Although I think I veered off a little bit in college, but
don't we all?
Like a lot of people.
I was a libertarian in college.
Right,
we all make mistakes.
That could possibly happen, right? But
right.
But anyway, but I would say that for a long time I would have been more of a traditional Republican, maybe a moderate Republican. A little bit of neoconservative, in me, and building what became a pretty large company, was pretty much in that track. I mean, populism, kind of the nationalist populism as we see now, really wasn't.
That's true.
Hadn't been given its kind of definition and substance, if you will, for a lot of those years, and again, I go back to that epiphany experience, and I go back to my commitment to the middle class. And the more I looked into it, and really we had our team do research on the middle class and look at how the middle class has been under assault for a long time, for 30 years. And, what's happened is, all the statistics on how they're struggling and living, 40% of American workers live paycheck to paycheck. That's pre-pandemic, 40%. Yeah. They have an average unpaid credit card balance every month of $7,000 that they can't pay off. They don't have any extra money saved for a healthcare emergency, for a family emergency, to send their kids to college. They're struggling. They were struggling before, and the pandemic, as we're beginning to find out, has had a disproportional negative effect on the middle class and working families. So, I looked at my own background, Will, and I looked at the people that I was working with, and when I really did the research, I went, this has to stop, because I honestly believe in my gut that one of the things, maybe the main thing that has helped drive the American economy and eventually make it the greatest economy in the world is the fact, one of the things that differentiates us in this country is that we have this large, vibrant, and relatively speaking, prosperous middle class, right? That has disposable income and, has built great public institutions. And if we lose that, if we get this this acceleration of the polarization of wealth and income in this country, if we get that, we risk that. And I think for the long term, that is our safest, sure way of ensuring the viability of our economy and, frankly, our society. So that's how I ended up there. And then once you fall into that and you start looking through that lens, all the populist concepts come into play.
That's true.
One of the things that kind of the populist mantra at this point, of course, is this concept of foreign wars, endless foreign wars. I was a conservative. I was a hawk. I'm still a hawk as far as I believe that we need to have the baddest, most lethal, potentially military in the world. Okay.
Right.
So we don't have to use it. Right.
Right.
But this intrusion into other countries and sending our troops there, as I begin to look at it, it's like, okay, first of all, who goes? Who pays the price in money? Who pays the price in blood? It's the middle class, basically, working families, and it's not fair. I had an experience. I have a son who's 32 years old, and we were talking, and this was a number of years ago, and we were driving the car talking. We were talking about the war in the Middle East, and I was talking about how muscular we need to be, and we need to go kick their butts and blah 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 blah. And he said to me, he said, Dad, he said, you may not realize it. He's very politically aware, and he said, since I have been kind of politically aware at all. He said, we've been at war my whole life that I can remember. We've been at war. And he said, what are we trying to achieve? And I mean, frankly, to be honest with you, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, you're right. What's the mission? Who's going over there? Who's dying? Who's funding this budget of trillions of dollars that we're spending in the Middle East for what? For what? And so that just put a whole new lens on it for me. And so all of these kind of populist concepts to me, they've come together. I don't know whether it's my background or it's just my building the company and seeing what's happening to the employees and potential employees, but I'm totally there. I think it's the future, and I think it's the way that we can take our country forward.
That's true. I mean, I don't come from like a middle-class background. This is one of those things where I grew up wealthy. And so it's weird to think of myself as like, oh, now I'm this populist commentator. But
you don't have to be middle-class to be a populist.
Right. Right. You don't have to. I agree. Right. No, Donald Trump is not middle-class right now. Donald Trump was upper class and everybody saw the populist. Carpe is here. Decided to say, hey, what's up? How's it going, Carpe? He's one of the, I don't know if you're familiar with Carpe Donaldson, one of the prime meme makers for the president, the guy who's made all the fun stuff. But at some point I need to get him on here and do a podcast with him.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I was thinking, what triggered me kind of shifting to the populist ranking. And it is some of the things that you're talking about, right? You take for granted, or I guess I take for granted, like if a, crisis happens and there's a healthcare emergency in my family, like I can just pay for it. That's just, like when bad things happen, bad things, I joke about the best thing about being of money is that when bad things happen, bad things don't happen. It's not like the consumption. It's the fact that if some crisis hits and it's solvable by money, like you will be able to solve it.
It gives you great comfort, right?
Yeah, right. It's like, so it really mitigates some of the, the most difficult moments in life. And so the fact that so many people are in a position where it's like, oh, despite being in the middle class and working very hard, and you being promised the American dream, they're not in a position where if they get hit with car breakdown or medical bill emergency, that's a serious crisis financially for them. I mean, that's brutal to hear about. And and then you start looking, okay, like how is our economic system actually working for the middle class? The massive quote unquote boom of the Obama years was really just a boom in asset prices. So those of us who own stocks did great. We're great. If you owned equities, you were fantastic. Like Obama was wonderful for you. But if you were actually working for a living, it was terrible. Exactly. And so I think that's a good indicator of, what ends up bringing people in the right to populism is sort of, okay, how has the promise of this pure, like globalized economy worked for the middle class of our country? It hasn't worked that great. Like wage levels were stagnant, even as equity prices were rising.
Hey. You know what? You're exactly right. It all goes back to, as you start looking back, almost started with you could go back to Roosevelt, I guess. We started with the Great Society with Lyndon Johnson, and Then you had the NAFTA debacle and bad trade deals that completely eviscerated the middle class and many of our small towns, our manufacturing towns, and it's been kind of a one-way slide, and that has to change. And Donald Trump kind of being really the first kind of presidential candidate in a long time to take up the mantle of the middle class, and then to kind of define the policies of modern populism that really brought people together. And it's true, I think, that Trump's personality and his grit attracted a lot of people, but I think people make a mistake by assuming that it was just Trump and it's just popularity, and that the 75 million people who voted for him, it was just on his personality. No, it was the fact that he was able to finally say to so many people whose families have been negatively affected that, hey, there is a way, there is hope. There are policies, there is a platform, there is a party, there's a way to begin to reverse this trend and have people speak for you and for your family. And I think that's been the key.
Yeah, I think Trump was just a big time catalyst for people changing their views on a lot of these things. I think Tucker Carlson, said something. I remember watching some interview where Tucker Carlson, he's like, well, I realized I was wrong about trade, when I started looking into it. And then the question is, okay, what else am I wrong about? Right? Because you think about trade as a conservative, the free trade orthodoxy was just overwhelming for 2 to 3 decades. Like the idea that any tariff ever would make any sense was just completely verboten. And now you think about it, you're like, okay, wait a second, but the trade deals meant that the Chinese were able to build their middle class while ours suffered. That doesn't seem right.
And their military.
And their military. I mean, to the point, like I don't know if you've been following the news today about that horrible press conference in Anchorage where you have Joe Biden's team getting humiliated, with the Chinese ambassador saying to their faces, you have no standing to lecture us about, speaking from a position of strength. Your country is garbage. And they're just sitting there and taking it. Like there's a weakness there. And I mean, part of that is obviously the Biden administration and their own problems. But part of that is also we built up China. I mean, China was unbelievably poor 40 years ago. And we've built them into a great power competitor to ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and they're starting to realize, I mean, I heard Jack Keane say last night that, the recent war games we've done in that part of the world, where they simulate a war between the U.S. and its allies with China, war game, that we haven't done so well. And I think we have some qualitative advantages, I think, in our weapons, but people don't understand that China is a serious threat in a lot, economic, militarily, socially, everything. They are the greatest threat we have faced since we faced the Soviet Union during the Cold War. We have given them that strength. We have sold out the middle class in this country and given that strength and that advantage to the Chinese. It's and what you're saying, that's the perfect, here we are. We're at that point where they were able to sit at a table with the United States of America and our senior foreign affairs officials and pretty much say, we're not afraid of you. You can't tell us what to do. We're not intimidated by you. I mean, the United States never really deals with, a rough hand and trying to throw our weight around. But we're at a point where now they just pretty much told us, we don't care what you think, right? That's pretty much what they're saying.
Man, it was, a complete disaster. So we're coming up towards, 40-minute mark. So I wanted to transition to something in particular that I saw you discuss in the past that I thought was really interesting as kind of a metaphor for politics generally, but you talked about it in the context of corporate culture, the idea. So you had this line, the heart and the fist. And could you just explain where that came from and what that meant for your company?
Sure. Well, as again, one of these things, you kind of make it up as you're going along when you're starting and building a business. But we developed a culture. Probably, frankly, if I really look back at it, because of the way the company started, I was 24 years old. The people that I hired that were my instructors, and we went and did camps together, they were like 19 to 22 or 20. We were a bunch of kids, and everybody had to do everything. So there wasn't this big hierarchy. It was a flat structure. It's very egalitarian in our approach. And as we built the company, we were able to some extent keep that egalitarian approach. And also, we're able to keep an emphasis by starting small and being the smallest company in the market and having to claw and fight our way to the point that we became the leading company. It doesn't just happen. And so you have to have this kind of determination. You have to develop a culture where you are supporting each other, where people are united behind a mission, and that mission has to have value. And they have to believe in it. The owner, or the principal, the president, has to believe in it, and you have to work at it. You have to fight, right? Now, so the flip side of that, to the egalitarian part of it, is that it's us. For us, it was us against the world, but we're our team. We're friends. We traveled together. We went from camp to camp. We had fun together. We had weekends together. But we all worked together in these camps. And so the idea that we loved each other and that we took care of each other, and those were our colleagues and our team members and our customers, the mostly young people that we were trying to help put them in a position where they gained leadership skills and where they could go out and take those and really use them, not only back at school, but for the rest of their lives. And so the heart has to do with the love of our customers, as we would say, and our team, our colleagues, right? But to be successful and sustain what you're trying to do, you also have to have sharp elbows. I mean, business is a contact sport, and you have to be able to have determination. You have to be able, you have to be able to fight. And it's important that's kind of like we're talking about with our country, right? Yeah. You have to at least be in a position where you can hold your own. So that's kind of how we built the varsity customer culture, and that's kind of the catchphrase that I use.
So this is sort of connecting to when I heard this phrase, I immediately thought about what I've kind of developed as not developed, but like my idea of what conservative politics is actually about. And it starts with the idea of like concentric circles of caring for like how much you care about certain people where they are, right? So I think of it like the core of it is your family, right? Like at the very center of the people you care most about are your family. And then it sort of expands outwards to like your friends, your coworkers, your community, your state, your area, your country, and then the world. And that's useful as a model, I think, for a few reasons. It helps you understand like why certain things feel pathological. So someone who, cares more about the suffering of people in Africa than they do about in their own community, there's like something weird about that. We immediately think, okay, your priorities are askew. Or somebody who, burns a family relationship or a friendship down over politics, like that, you should care more about your friendships than you do about what's happening in the national community, for the most part, right? So the heart and the fist kind of exemplifies like the heart is for the people closest to you. The fist is when you start getting further and further out, where the circle of care becomes marginal and you start meeting your adversaries. And I think a big part of conservative politics, and especially with the Trumpian turn, I remember maybe a decade ago reading an article in Forbes that said something like, why should I care more about a stranger in Tijuana than I do, or why should I care more about a stranger in Akron than I do about a stranger in Tijuana? And to me, the answer is that, well, one's an American, one's your countryman, and one is not. You should care more. I mean, part of being in a country and being in a project together is caring more about the people here than elsewhere. It's not that you don't care about the people elsewhere at all, but rather that part of being in a nation and being together is the idea that you care more about the people.
Absolutely. Agree with you 100%.
So that's where that's how when I read A Heart in the Fist, I thought, okay, this is a corollary to that, right? Like
it's a more colloquial way of expressing it. Right?
No, but I mean, it's not even like everything's colloquial, right? Like, and the more colloquial, the better. I don't, again, as I've said before, just because I talk pretty doesn't mean I'm smart, right? Like, or I'm smarter,
you're smart,
right? Like I talk pretty, but I had, you had experience building an organization. I spent a decade talking. A random note is that I wish, I did college debate very seriously, and it sort of imploded on itself. I mean, into a massive fest of, social justice and self-critique and communism. And I had the insight. I was like, man, if we had a Jeff Webb at college debate who just managed to say, no, we're going to turn this into a whole competitive sport that people are going to watch. Because you can. I mean, people watch public debates now, and if you properly massage competitive debate, you could make it into an interesting spectator sport in its own, or like competition in its own right, kind of like chess.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet that hasn't happened, and instead it's just dying on the vine. And so I mean, I don't know where I was going with that.
I think we have a new business opportunity, right? We're gonna bring we could bring athleticism into debate too somehow. Certainly entertainment, like you're talking about. I like it.
In the last 10 minutes, guys, if you want to ask some questions, feel free. Like, I'm gonna start going through some of these comments. I'm just gonna make Jeff feel good because we have very good comments. He says, "This is riveting. The Beyond Politics content is where it's at." This is Jason Broyles on YouTube. John Brown on YouTube saying, quote, "Jeff Webb is extremely impressive. He's got a great story. He's a great communicator, and he's got a great heart. Jeff Webb for president." So,
wow, thank you.
See, it's very about positivity here.
Send your contributions to Will. He will forward them to me.
Right? Yeah. If you want to do that, subscribe to Human Events. That's at humanevents.com.
That's great.
Members.
Yeah.
Also, again, if you want to support us, do subscribe at youtube.com/Human Events. Remember, Periscope's coming down soon, so that's one of our biggest platforms. Sadly. I assume Twitter will have some replacement, but if they don't, you never know. Also, like what we're doing at facebook.com/Human Events Media. Looks like we don't have too many comments. People have just been absorbed or something.
Bored.
Or bored. Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe this has been remarkably tedious. Who knows? But I actually think I don't know. I mean, I think it's interesting, and I think one of the things I really do want to. I mean, we sort of scratch the surface at some of these business decisions, but I always find it, especially with someone like you. I mean, you have, how long did you spend at Varsity? 35 years, something like that, or did I get that right?
Make it 40-ish.
Make it 40-ish. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of, interesting decisions and experiences that you're going to have. That, and I think part of the interesting thing is really drilling down in detail as to like why make a specific business decision, how that came to be, and why it was made. I always find that really interesting. When I've read books about businesses or something, I think you ever read Barbarians at the Gates, the one about the Orgio Nabisco, right? Amazing. Like, that's a fascinating book, extraordinarily detailed about that whole buyout. And so I feel like there, I assume there are some things you're not able to talk about due to non-disclosure agreements and things like that. But at a certain point, like, I would love to dig into, some of the more interesting events in your business life.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, and as Lame says, not bored, a fun discussion. So I hope people are just into it and enjoying it. So, well, we're almost at 1 o'clock. I think this is about a good time to wrap up this first one. But
you have to at least give me a chance to make sure everybody knows about my
book. Right. Plug away. This is the plug phase.
It's called The American Restoration: How to Unshackle the Great Middle Class, and you can get it at middleclasswarriors.com.
Right. I'm gonna put the Amazon link to that right now in the chat everywhere. So this is, if you guys want to go check out this book, that is in the chat. I'll try and put it in the description too. And let's see if I can make a banner out of it. I can make a banner out of it.
In this book, Will, I try to take kind of a business and practical approach to the issues of the day. Mm-hmm. It's it's just got a little different perspective, I think, for some people.
Yeah, no, we'll have to. We were going to do this every week. We'll get into detail about all these podcasts. So, about your book and all the ideas in it. I think I need to read it. That actually would probably help me for that particular podcast. I need to actually sit down and read the book. So we'll do that. With that, I think everybody, and also Jeff Webb, you should find him on Twitter. He's at Jeff_Webb, if I have that right. So, at Jeff Webb on Twitter. Follow him, follow Human Events, subscribe to what we're doing, and there's a lot more coming. So, Jeff, thank you so much.
It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.
We're going to keep doing this. All right.
Sounds great. Here we go.
All right. Talk to everybody soon.